The night I met Sergeant Cole Radley, I was parked on the gravel shoulder of Route 9 with my 8-year-old daughter asleep in the back seat, and a flashlight was burning a white hole through my windshield. He leaned into my window, chewing gum with his mouth open, and he said the words that would eventually end his career. He just had no idea yet. He tapped my door with 2 knuckles and told me, "Round here, a ticket like this costs more than money, but cash makes it disappear real quick." And I remember thinking very calmly, while my heart slammed against my ribs, that in 4 days I would be sworn in as his boss. I want to tell you the whole thing from the beginning because if I only give you that moment, you might think it was luck. It wasn't luck. It was a slow road, and a lot of it was paid for by people who never got to see where it ended. My name is Desmond Wills. I am 41 years old, and for 18 of those years I wore a badge in Detroit. I started as a patrol officer on the east side, riding a beat where the streetlights stayed broken for years at a time because nobody downtown thought the people who lived there were worth the electricity. I worked my way up to detective, then to commander of a violent crimes unit. I closed cases other people had given up on. I sat in living rooms with mothers who had buried their sons, and I promised them I would not stop, and most of the time I kept that promise, and the times I couldn't still keep me up at night. I did not come from money. My father drove a city bus for 31 years and my mother cleaned offices at night. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, and the whole place smelled like fabric softener and diesel. My parents told me one thing over and over until it was carved into me. They said, "A black man in this country has to be twice as clean, twice as calm, and twice as prepared, because he will get half as much benefit of the doubt." I hated hearing it as a kid. As a grown man, I understood it was the most useful thing they ever gave me. I met my wife, Renee, at a community fish fry when I was 26. She was a second-grade teacher with a laugh that could fill a gymnasium, and she saw straight through the tough guy act I was trying to run. We got married in her mother's backyard. We had one daughter, Amara, and Renee used to say Amara got my stubbornness and her sense of humor, which she claimed was the worst possible combination. 3 years ago, Renee died. Ovarian cancer. It moved fast, faster than any of the doctors expected, and one October morning I was a husband and by spring I was not. Amara was 5. She still asked me for months afterward when Mommy was coming home from the hospital, and I had to find a new way to break my own heart every single time I answered her. After Renee passed, Detroit stopped fitting me. Every corner had a memory attached to it, and the memories had teeth. So when an old friend of mine reached out, I actually picked up the phone instead of letting it go to voicemail. His name is Jerry Hantz. We went through the academy together 20 years back, and while I stayed on the street, Jerry went into administration and eventually left Michigan entirely. For the last few years he had been the city manager of Millbrook, Ohio, a mid-sized city of about 90,000 people sitting between 2 interstates, the kind of place with a proud old downtown, a struggling mill on the river, and a police department with a reputation that made people nervous. Jerry told me the truth on that first call, which is why I trusted him. He said, "Desmond, I am not going to lie to you and tell you this is a soft landing. This department is sick." The last chief resigned before the state could finish looking at him. We have a consent decree hanging over our heads. Complaints against officers get filed and then vanish. And I need somebody who cannot be bought and does not scare. And every single name on my list has one of those 2 problems except yours. I asked him why he thought a widowed Detroit commander would move his kid to a town where the police were rotten. And Jerry said the thing that got me. He said, "Because you already know what a broken department costs the people it's supposed to protect. And because you're the only man I know who would rather fix it than run it." Amara and I talked about it at the kitchen table over grilled cheese. She was 8 by then, sharp as a tack, missing a front tooth. I laid it out honestly the way I always tried to. New town, new school, new house, further from grandma. She thought about it seriously, the way she thinks about everything, and then she asked me only one question. She asked, "Will you be happy there, Daddy?" And I told her I thought I could be. She said, "Then okay, but I get to pick my room." so we packed a rental truck. I accepted the job as chief of police of Millbrook. The city council confirmed it in a quiet vote, and the mayor, a woman named Ellen Pruitt, set my swearing-in ceremony for the following Monday, with press and a photographer and the whole production. Jerry warned me to keep a low profile until then, because the department did not yet know who was coming, and he wanted the announcement to land like a door slamming, not a rumor leaking under it. Almost nobody in Millbrook had seen my face. To the officers I was about to lead, I was just a name in a memo. An outsider. A problem coming down the highway. That is the part Sergeant Radley did not understand when he leaned into my window on Route 9. To him I was nobody. A black man in a rented Honda with Michigan plates. A car seat in the back, driving through his town at night. To him, I was money that hadn't been collected yet. Let me back up 2 hours because the whole thing started at the U-Haul lot. We rolled into Millbrook on a Thursday evening, 3 days before the ceremony. I had the moving truck and the sedan, so I dropped the truck at the rental lot on the edge of town and figured I would grab dinner with Amara and check into the extended stay hotel where we were living until our house closed. Simple night. That was the plan. The truck return took forever. The kid working the counter was new and the computer kept freezing, and by the time I got back on the road with Amara it was full dark, close to 9 o'clock, and she was fading fast in the back seat clutching the stuffed rabbit she has had since she was 2. I took Route 9 because the GPS said it was the fast way back to the hotel. It runs along the river past the old mill, and there is a long stretch with no houses and no lights. That is where the cruiser lit me up. Now I have been a cop for 18 years. I have made thousands of stops myself. So the first thing I noticed was that I had done nothing. I was doing 32 in a 35. My lights worked. My plates were current. There was no reason for the stop, and that told me something before he ever reached my window. A clean stop has a reason. This one was fishing. I did everything the way my father taught me and the way I have taught 100 rookies. I pulled over smoothly. I put the car in park, turned on the dome light, rolled down my window, and placed both hands on the top of the steering wheel where he could see them. I told Amara softly to stay calm and stay buckled, and she woke up just enough to whisper, "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" And I told her, "No, baby, we did not. Sometimes police just check things." The officer took his time getting out. When he finally came up to my window, the flashlight hit me full in the face, longer than it needed to, and I got my first look at him around the glare. Big man, maybe 50, gray at the temples, a sergeant's stripes on his sleeve. His name tape read Radley. He had the relaxed, heavy way of a man who has never once been told no in his own town. "License, registration, insurance," he said. Not a greeting, not a reason for the stop. I handed everything over slowly, narrating my movements the way you learn to do when you want to go home alive. Michigan license. Rental paperwork for the car. He looked at the Michigan address and something changed in his face. A little light came on. Not suspicion. Interest. "Long way from home," he said. "What brings you to Millbrook?" "Moving here for work," I said. I kept my voice level and easy. I did not tell him what the work was. Something told me not to. Call it 18 years of instinct. He clicked his tongue. He walked slowly around the back of my car, and I watched him in the mirror. He was not checking my plate. He was looking in my windows, at the boxes in the trunk, at Amara in her car seat. He was appraising. He was counting. He came back to the window and leaned down close, and he lowered his voice to that fake friendly register that is more menacing than shouting. "Here's the situation, friend," he said. "You crossed the center line back there. That's a serious moving violation in this state. Reckless op, we call it. That's points, that's a court date, that's your insurance going through the roof. With a Michigan license and out-of-state plates, that's a real headache for a guy just trying to start fresh." He paused, let it hang. "Now, I could write all that up. Or we could handle it the Millbrook way and you go on home to bed." I had not crossed any center line and both of us knew it. I asked him very politely what the Millbrook way was. He smiled. 200 cash makes the whole thing go away. No ticket, no court, no points. Just a friendly welcome to town. He glanced at the back seat at my sleeping daughter, and he added the part that told me exactly who he was. He said, "Real nice you got your little girl with you. Be a shame for her to see her daddy dragged into all this over some paperwork. Kids remember that kind of thing. I want you to understand what happened inside me in that second, because it is the hinge the whole story turns on. Every instinct in my body wanted to tell him who I was. I wanted to watch the color drain out of his face. I wanted to say, 'Sergeant, on Monday I am going to walk into your building and read your name off the roster, and you are going to remember this moment for the rest of your life.' That would have felt incredible for about 10 seconds. But my father's voice was in my head. Twice as clean, twice as calm, twice as prepared. And a colder, more useful thought landed on top of it. If I revealed myself right now, Radley walks. He was too smart to keep pushing once he knew. He would apologize, tear up nothing, wave me on, and quietly warn every dirty cop in that department to steer clear of the new chief. I would have scared one roach and lost the whole nest. And a man like Radley does not invent a scheme like this on a Thursday night. He runs it, which meant there was a system, and systems have records and patterns and other victims and people at the top. So I made a choice that a lot of people watching from the outside would not understand. I decided to be nobody. I decided to let Cole Radley believe he had one, so I could learn exactly how deep the rot went. I told him I only had 120 on me. My hands were shaking a little, and I let them because a scared man is a believable man. He took the 120 out of my palm, folded it into his shirt pocket without a receipt and without a word, and patted the roof of my car twice. "Welcome to Millbrook," he said. "Drive safe." He did not run my name. He did not write anything down. He got in his cruiser and pulled away, and I sat on the shoulder of Route 9 with my heart going like a drum, and Amara stirred behind me and asked if we could go now. Here is the part one have not told you yet. My phone was in the cup holder the entire time, camera facing up, recording audio. I had turned it on the second his lights came up behind me, out of pure habit, the same habit I drill into every young officer. Record everything. It is not paranoia. It is the difference between your word and the truth. I drove Amara back to the hotel. I read her 2 chapters of her book and tucked her in, and then I sat on the edge of the other bed in the dark, and I played the recording back 3 times, and I listened to my own voice stay calm while a man in a uniform threatened my child over a lie. And I made myself a promise that was not about revenge. I promised I would do it right, cleaner and calmer and more prepared than they had ever seen, because doing it right was the only way it would actually stick. The next morning, Friday, I did something Radley would never have expected. I did not go to the police station. I went to the county courthouse and I asked a clerk, casually, if I could see the traffic citation records for the last 2 years. Public records. Anybody can request them. She printed me a stack. I sat in my car in the parking lot and I read. And a picture came together that turned my stomach. There was a stretch of Route 9, the same stretch where Radley stopped me, that generated a strange number of traffic stops. But here was the thing. The stops did not match the tickets. Officers were logging that they had made a stop, running the plate on the radio so there was a record, and then no citation was ever filed with the court. Stop after stop after stop with no paper at the other end. In a normal department, a stop with no ticket means a warning. But you do not get this many of them in the exact same place, always at night, disproportionately involving cars with out-of-state plates, and, I would learn later, disproportionately involving Black and Latino drivers. Those were not warnings. Those were collections. I flagged one name that showed up more than any other as the reporting officer. Radley C. But he was not alone. There were 3 or 4 other names that clustered around his, the same little group, working the same shifts, the same roads. It was a crew. That afternoon I called Jerry Hantz and I told him everything. Everything except my plan, because I did not fully have one yet. Jerry went quiet on the phone for a long time. Then he said something that chilled me. He said, Desmond, I always figured there was skimming. Coffee money, free meals, small stuff. I did not know it was organized. And if it's organized, then somebody above Radley is protecting it. A sergeant does not run a shakedown crew for years without a lieutenant or a captain looking the other way and taking a cut. You need to be very careful who you trust in that building on Monday. I told him I would be careful. And then I made a mistake that I have thought about every day since. I asked Jerry who in the department I could rely on. And Jerry said, without hesitation, Warren Boyd, Deputy Chief. He's been holding that place together since the last chief walked out. Straightest arrow I've met there. Lean on Warren. I trusted Jerry. So I trusted the name. Monday came. The swearing-in was held in the city council chamber. Flags behind me, cameras in front of me. Mayor Pruitt gave a speech about a new era of accountability. I raised my right hand and I swore an oath to protect and serve the people of Millbrook, and I meant every word of it. And I thought about Renee, who would have squeezed my hand and told me not to slouch. And then I looked out at the officers assembled in their dress uniforms, and I found Cole Radley's face in the third row. I have replayed that moment 1,000 times, the way you replay a favorite song. I watched him listen to the mayor say my name, Chief Desmond Wills. I watched him not react because to him it was just a name. And then I stepped up to the podium and I looked directly at him, and I held it, and I watched the recognition arrive on his face like a slow-motion car crash. He knew the face. He knew where he had seen it. He knew he had reached into the pocket of the man now standing behind the chief's podium and taken $120 in cash, and threatened his little girl to do it. The blood left his face. His jaw went slack. He looked like a man who had just heard his own name read at a funeral. And I did not smile. I did not nod. I just held his eyes for one long second and then moved on, and I let him sit in that fear for the rest of the ceremony, because I wanted him to understand that I already knew, and that knowing was not going to be enough to save me from doing this the right way. After the ceremony, a man crossed the room to shake my hand with both of his, and it was Warren Boyd, the deputy chief. Late 50s, silver crew cut, firm handshake, warm eyes. He said all the right things. He said, "Chief, this department has been waiting for someone like you. Whatever you need, my door is open, day or night. I carried this place on my back for 6 months, and I am proud to hand it to a real leader." He helped me carry a box of my things up to my new office. He told me which restaurants were good and which lieutenant to watch out for. He asked about Amara by name, said his own kids were grown and he missed having young ones around. By the end of that first day, I believed Jerry was right. Warren Boyd was going to be my anchor. That was the betrayal, though I would not see it for 2 more weeks. The man carrying my box up the stairs, asking about my daughter, was the man who owned Cole Radley. He was the top of the pyramid, and he had spent that whole first day doing what a smart predator does when a new sheriff arrives. Getting close, learning the shape of me, deciding whether I could be managed, and if not, how I could be broken. For the first 2 weeks I moved slowly and I watched. I did not go after Radley. In fact, I was almost friendly to him, which I could see terrified him more than anything, because he did not know what I knew or what I was going to do. I met every officer. I rode along on shifts. I asked questions and mostly I listened. And I found my ally almost by accident. Her name was Officer Danielle Cho, 3 years on the job, assigned to the same district as Radley's crew. I noticed her because she was the only officer who filed complete, meticulous reports, and because she flinched every time Radley walked into a room. I asked her to stay late one night to help me understand the district, just the 2 of us, and I watched her decide whether she could trust me. She could. Came out slowly at first, then all at once. She had joined the force because her uncle had been a beat cop in San Francisco and she idolized him. And within her first year in Millbrook, she had watched senior officers pull the exact scheme I had experienced. She had reported it. She filed a formal internal complaint 18 months earlier. And the complaint vanished. Not denied. Vanished. It never reached internal affairs. After that, Her patrol car started having mechanical problems nobody could fix. Her backup was slow to arrive on dangerous calls. Somebody keyed the word rat into the paint of her personal truck in the department lot. The message was clear. She had been keeping her head down and her mouth shut ever since, and hating herself for it. I asked her the question that mattered. I asked, "Danielle, who did you file that complaint with?" And she looked at me with tears standing in her eyes and she said, "Deputy Chief Boyd. He's the one who takes internal complaints. He told me he'd handle it personally." The floor dropped out from under me. I did not let it show. But in that moment every warm thing Warren Boyd had said to me flipped over and showed its other side. The open door. The offer to handle whatever I needed. The questions about my daughter. He had not been welcoming the new chief. He had been building a file on me the same way he buried Danielle's complaint, the same way he had probably managed every threat to his operation for years. Cole Radley was a soldier. Warren Boyd was the general, and he had spent my first 2 weeks standing right next to me with his hand on my shoulder. Here is where a lot of people, if this were a movie, would want me to do something dramatic. Kick down his door. Rip the stripes off his uniform. Make a speech. And I understand the appeal. Believe me, I do. There is a version of me that wanted to grab Cole Radley by the collar on Route 9, and there is a version of me that wanted to fire Warren Boyd on the spot and enjoy the look on his face. But I have watched that kind of justice fall apart in court 100 times. A chief who acts out of personal anger gives every guilty man a lawyer's best argument. Bias, vendetta, retaliation. If I moved against Boyd because he had wronged me personally, a good defense attorney would turn me into the villain and Boyd would keep his pension and his reputation, and Danielle Cho would pay the price for the rest of her career. Doing it because it felt good would have guaranteed that it did not work. So I did the hardest thing, which was nothing that anyone could see. I called the county prosecutor, a sharp, cautious woman named Adaora Namdi, and I laid out what I had. She agreed the internal department was too compromised to investigate itself, because the man in charge of investigating misconduct was the target. So we went outside it. She brought in the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force out of the field office, because taking money from motorists under color of law crosses federal lines fast. Extortion. Civil rights violations. We were no longer talking about a bad cop. We were talking about a criminal enterprise operating out of a police department, and the people who investigate that do not wear Millbrook badges. For 6 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I was the reforming new chief, holding community meetings, meeting with pastors and business owners, being visibly, boringly clean. And in the evenings, I met with Adaora and 2 federal agents in a rented office 3 towns over, and we built a case brick by brick. Danielle Cho became the heart of it. She had never thrown away her copy of that buried complaint. She had kept a private log for 18 months, dates and names and plate numbers, everything she had witnessed. And here is the discovery that broke the case wide open. The federal agents subpoenaed financial records, and they found that Warren Boyd, a deputy chief on a public salary, had been making regular cash deposits for years, structured carefully in amounts just under the reporting threshold. And every deposit lined up, week after week, with the shifts that Radley's crew worked Route 9. Boyd was not just protecting the shakedowns. He was banking them. The soldiers collected, and the general took his cut, and the buried complaints were how he kept the machine oiled. Then came the part one had been dreading. To close it, the prosecutor needed the enterprise caught in the act, on tape, ideally taking money and then handing it up the chain. And the cleanest way to get that was for someone the crew already believed was a mark to be stopped again. So I did it myself. On a Friday night, with the agent's full knowledge, I drove a plain car down Route 9, wired with a marked bill fund provided by the FBI. I did not use Amara. She was safe at home with a trusted sitter, and I want to be clear about that because I would never have put her within a mile of it. It was just me on that dark road, and I will admit my heart was in my throat, not because I was scared of Cole Radley, but because I knew that if this worked, there was no coming back from what I was about to set in motion, and if it failed, they would know I was hunting them. Radley's crew took the bait. A younger officer named Petit made the stop, ran the same script, and collected the marked cash, all of it recorded. The agents had already documented the cash moving up the chain twice before. That was the last brick. The arrests came on a gray Tuesday morning. Federal agents and state police, not Millbrook officers, walked into that station and took Cole Radley out of the roll call room in front of the whole shift. They took Officer Petit and 2 others. And they walked up to the second floor and arrested Deputy Chief Warren Boyd in his office. The same office where he had promised Danielle Cho he would handle it personally. I was standing in the hallway when they brought Boyd out in handcuffs. He stopped in front of me. For the first time since I met him, the warm eyes were gone, and I saw what had always been underneath. He looked at me and he said quietly, so only I could hear, "You should have just taken the welcome, Chief. Would have been easier for both of us." And I looked back at him and I told him the only thing I had to say. I said, "You threatened my daughter through your man on a dark road. There was never going to be an easy way." Then they walked him out into the daylight where the cameras were waiting. I would love to tell you that was the happy ending, that the town threw me a parade. It did not happen like that. Real life is grayer than that. The consequences were heavy for everyone, including me. Cole Radley, facing federal charges and a mountain of evidence, took a plea and cooperated, which is the only reason we learned the full reach of it. Warren Boyd fought it, spent every dollar he had skimmed on lawyers, and still went to federal prison, though not for as long as I thought he deserved. 2 officers were convicted, and several more resigned rather than face what the investigation might turn up. The consent decree that had been hanging over the department landed, and we spent a year rebuilding under a federal monitor. And the backlash against me was real. The police union filed grievances. Anonymous voices called me an outsider who came to town to destroy good cops. Some of it was ugly and some of it was racial, and none of it was surprising. One night, 3 weeks after the arrests, someone put a brick through the front window of the house Amara and I had finally moved into. There was no note. There did not need to be. I sat on the floor of my living room with glass all around me and my sleeping daughter upstairs, and for the first time I asked myself if it had been worth it. It was Amara who answered that for me, without knowing she did. The next morning she came downstairs, saw the plywood over the window, and asked what happened. I told her the truth in kid-sized pieces. I told her that Daddy's job was to make sure police officers are fair to everybody, and that some people who were not being fair got in trouble, and that they were angry about it. She thought about it, chewing her cereal, and then she said, "So you got the mean ones in trouble?" And I said yes. And she nodded like that settled it and said, "Good." Renee would say good too. She calls her mother Renee sometimes when she is being very serious. I had to leave the kitchen so she would not see my face. The realistic resolution is that reform is slow and it is not clean and it does not fit in a movie. But it happened. Danielle Cho was promoted to detective, and she deserved every bit of it, and she never had to look over her shoulder in that building again. We built a real internal affairs system, one that reports outside the chain of command so that no future Warren Boyd can bury a complaint by simply being the person you complain to. Route 9 stopped being a toll road. The traffic stops with no tickets disappeared, because the whole point of them had been arrested. Community meetings that used to have 6 angry people started having 60, then 100, because people slowly began to believe that showing up might actually change something. I am still the chief of Millbrook. Some officers still do not like me and probably never will, and I have made my peace with that. Amara is 10 now. She has a best friend named Priya and a loose tooth and a strong opinion about everything, and she is happy here, which was the only question that ever really mattered to me. I think a lot about the choice I made on the shoulder of Route 9, about how badly I wanted to reveal myself in that moment, to enjoy the fear on Cole Radley's face, to win right then. And I think about how, if I had done that, he would still be out there tonight, working that same dark road, reaching into some other frightened person's window, threatening some other man's child. The satisfying thing and the right thing are almost never the same thing, and the space between them is where justice actually lives. Here is the lesson I have carried out of all of it, and I will give it to you plainly. Power reveals people, but it does not create them. Cole Radley did not become corrupt the night he stopped me. He was corrupt for years, and the uniform and the badge and the empty road just gave him permission to show it. And the way you defeat that kind of man is not by becoming a mirror of him, not with rage or revenge or a badge used as a weapon. You defeat him by being twice as clean, twice as calm, and twice as prepared, until the truth is so solid that no lie can move it. My father told me that when I was a boy above a laundromat that smelled like diesel, and I did not understand it until a man in a uniform threatened my daughter and I chose to win the slow way instead of the loud way. So let me leave you with a question, and I really do want to hear your answer down in the comments. If you had been the one sitting in that car on Route 9, with your child asleep in the back seat and a corrupt officer at your window, and you knew that in 4 days you would hold power over his entire career, would you have revealed yourself in that moment and felt that rush of justice? Or would you have stayed silent and done it the slow, patient, right way, even knowing it would cost you a brick through your window in a town that took years to trust you? Tell me honestly. I am not sure everyone would make the same choice I did, and I would like to know what you would do.